Hey homeschool friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to my January homeschool update. I love making these videos, you guys. And in these videos, I typically talk about kind of a little bit of a life update, as well as I chat through our family subjects and my kids' individual subjects. And for a little reference, I have a 4th grader, 3rd grader, and twin kindergartners. So let's just hop into the video because I tend to be a bit chatty and these videos tend to go a bit long. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel, all that stuff. And so like I said, this is my January update video. But before we hop into all the details, I do want to make a quick shout out to Sonlight for sending me a lot of the curriculum I'm going to be talking about today, especially our family subjects. So thanks again to Sonlight. And I always do have an affiliate link down below if you're interested in checking out Sonlight. Let's just move to my life update. Okay guys, so honestly, things are fine. January was a pretty steady month of just trying to get kind of back into the groove after Christmas, right? I know you all felt that as well. We did have kind of a lot of ups and downs we had pink eye, then I had pink eye and I had a sinus infection, and then my oldest son turned 10 years old and him and his dad went to Legoland as like a special treat. But that did affect our homeschool and kind of our rhythm. So it's been a little bit of a bumpy start. I wouldn't say a bad start. We're fine, and it was a good month of learning, but it was just a little kind of more all over the place than normal. And then the other thing that's been going on lately is I've been preparing to have my 2nd round of infusions. So I have an autoimmune disease, and currently I'm doing 2 infusions every 6 months sort of idea, but it is something that just takes a lot out of me, you guys. It makes me very tired. I feel like it's challenging for like the week after the infusion, and these infusions are every 2 weeks. So this is happening in February. And I feel like my anticipation is kind of high for it. I'm trying to prepare myself, trying to kind of prepare our homeschool for me being less than top notch. And so in doing that, I've been trying to prepare like my YouTube content for this channel as well as my book channel, which I'm not sure if all of you know that I do have a book channel. I love to read as a hobby and I love to share it. But anyway, it's always linked down below. So I'm trying to like pre-film some content. I'm also trying to kind of work through some of the curriculum for next year. I've been making a number of videos on this channel about that. Not that I need to decide. I just feel like this is when I tend to decide, and I think I would be more stressed if I hadn't thought about it at all. So I'm trying to kind of pre-think or at least get myself a couple steps ahead, if that makes sense. And so that's life. But now let's get into the homeschool update, which is probably why you clicked on this video to start with. So I like to start with my family subjects. You guys, I love my family subjects. Like I said, we're doing mostly Sonlight, all Sonlight, never mind, not just mostly, all Sonlight. And I'm using it for history, Bible, literature, and science for my big kids as well as my twins. So let's just focus on my big kids for a second. They are doing HBLC, which is the 2nd year of world history. Now, I think my favorite has been the history this past chunk of weeks. And it's because of the topic, you guys. It's so interesting. And it's so interesting to also bring this subject to my kids for the first time. Like we are talking about Reformation and the Catholics and the Protestants and all the things that were going on in Europe around those times. And you know, even for me, I'm sure I've learned all this, but I liked having this sequence of how it all went together when you're even talking about like the Spanish Armada and Queen Elizabeth I and King Henry VIII and all the things that happened with him, right? And it doesn't even really deep dive into that, but I do love how Sonlight is set up, how their history is set up. So I brought the 2 resources. So these 2 resources, I think they work really well together. They're so complementary. Like for instance, we typically read about a topic in here. So say the chapter was on kind of Elizabeth I or King Henry VIII. We read about it in here and it's a little bit more story format. So I really don't understand how people don't like this book. I love this book. I feel like my kids are always engaged, especially their ages, which is 8.5 and 10 years old. And they can listen to this. It's not that long. But what I love is then the next day typically, so I try not to do the history kind of out of order, but the next day we typically look in this book and it'll take kind of the same topic in a similar way, which to me, it reinforces the learning, right? It talks about the fact that, do you remember we learned about this yesterday? We talked about this. Now do you see the pictures of like the Spanish Armada? Can you see how that would have looked or can you think about how that would have felt? And so the history I feel like has just been really interesting for me, but on top of it, it's been really interesting for my kids and teaching them. Like for instance, like we hadn't done a ton of talking about different denominations of Christianity or anything like that. We haven't talked about Catholics. What are some of the tenets of the Catholic Church? Things like that. And so it was just really fun. And then, like, for instance, there's a Catholic church that's by our house, and they never knew that that was a Catholic church. So now every time we pass by it, they're like, oh, look, Mom, look, it's the Catholic Church. And I'm like, yes, now you know what that is. Just because we talked about it in our history lessons, it just kind of brought a real practical kind of thing to life for them. I just love that. I love that about being there for all those small moments, if you know what I mean. So I'd say that was kind of our standout for HBLC as well as science. I'm just going to try and hit on some standouts today, so this isn't like a 60-minute video. So the history by far was my favorite. And to tie in with that is also the map work and the timeline work. And I've talked about these in various videos. I feel like sometimes it's just like we're just doing it and it's totally fine. Other times it just really clicks. And I feel like we've been in a recent season of it just really clicking, like where we would like pull out the timeline book and they would see all the other things that are happening. And maybe, actually this is probably why, because the first level I did with these two kids, my two oldest, was the Exploring American History back when it was HBLK for Sonlight. And so they have all the stickers in there for early American history, right? But now we're getting to the timeline. In Europe, we have like Jamestown being set up. We have Puritans and the Mayflower and all those things that they've seen before. But now they're seeing it not just from the side of American history, they're seeing it from world history and maybe like what caused the Puritans to seek out a new land, right? Prior to that, they're like, oh, yay, the Mayflower, they're here. And then there was like Thanksgiving and all the things, right? So they have that peg in their mind. But now you come back around and you have this like religious unrest in Europe, and they understand maybe why some of those people came to the new land. You know what I mean? I think that is just so fascinating. I find those connections really cool, and my kids found those connections really cool, which is just fun to see. So that was a highlight from January. The other thing is more of an experiment that I did. So my kids, like I said, I have a recently turned 10-year-old and an 8.5-year-old. We're doing HBLC, which is geared towards 8 to 10-year-olds. So as you can see, my son started it when he was kind of midway in that age range, but my daughter was on the lower end. And then I feel like just due to her personality, I never knew if she was understanding because she would shy away from answering questions. And I was like, well, maybe she either doesn't get it and I need to like separate them earlier than maybe I was planning. I love the idea of them working together. But I was like, but if she's not getting it, I don't want them to stay together. I want her to have a curriculum that is on her level, right? So I ran this experiment when my son was in Legoland, is we just kept doing our history. We did our history, and I just did it with my daughter without my son around, and we did the same thing. I wasn't trying to do anything different, and I asked the same questions. I asked discussion questions. I asked kind of more narration leading questions. She did fine. You guys, she did just fine. She was engaged and chatting with me, and I think it just comes down to a bit of her personality and a bit of her brother's personality. And that was affirming in me that we're okay where we're at. I might just need to structure how I do discussions a little bit differently, or just think about it a little bit more, to be honest. But I did answer the question of like, is she overwhelmed? Is this too hard? And the answer is no. She's got it. It's fine. But I was so happy to do that. The other things I want to talk about are the read alouds, right? So everything else, it's going good. I don't need to get into it too much. We've finished a couple read alouds, and I realized just kind of over the course of my filming schedule and Christmas and all of that, I didn't talk about some of these, but these are what we have finished from the program. The Cricket in Times Square. This was a fantastic read, you guys. It's a classic. I love just kind of the historic nature of it. I love just the friendship aspect of all of the animals, where you're following a cricket who happened to jump on a train that was going from the country, I forget where, Connecticut or something, to the city, and ends up in like the Times Square train station or subway station. And then he meets some friends, like a cat and a mouse, and they form this friendship. And then there's this little boy involved and their family, and you kind of get a glimpse into family life in early, I don't even know what this, early 1900s New York. I loved it. I thought it was really good. This was one of the only books we've mostly listened to. So this was an example of an audiobook option for us, which I think is great. I have no problems with bringing audiobooks into our homeschool. The next one we read is the one we mostly read in January, and that was Captain Nobody by Dean Pitchford. You guys, I would say this is my kids' current favorite. It's a little bit more modern language, obviously. There's a lot of good classics in Sonlight, but there's also ones that are pulled out for good reasons. And I feel like some people bristle at some of the modern books that are on the Sonlight book list, but I don't. I feel like there's always a reason, and I've watched a number of videos as to how Sonlight chooses books. And it's usually that there's kind of a redemption story, that maybe characters learn something. And this happens in this book. It's about this boy who has an older brother who's like this football star, and then he gets hurt. His brother does. And he's like in a coma, and the whole town is in an uproar. And he's really worried, and he's trying not to be worried because he's trying to protect his parents. And his parents are trying to protect him, but he responds to kind of the trauma of this event in a way of like, he makes up a costume. It was kind of around Halloween. And he develops this costume called Captain Nobody. And then he wants to kind of be Captain Nobody, right? And I think it's just like this emotional escapism, like he's trying to protect himself. He doesn't realize it. But it also has a lot of underlying messages of like, being yourself. Like, he is much smaller and scrawnier than like his star football player brother, and so he just kind of has to own the fact that he is who he is, and maybe he's teased and not noticed, and he gets more noticed when he's Captain Nobody and things like that. So it is an excellent book. I do want to put a disclaimer in here because this actually is one thing I wish was in the Sonlight Instructor's Guide, and usually there's more than enough in the Instructor's Guide, but I think they needed this. Is there was a mention, I'd say about like 10 chapters from the end, of one of the kids supposedly attempting to commit suicide. So it kind of came out of nowhere, in my opinion. And then my kids, of course, asked, well, what is suicide? We had to have that conversation, which I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, as always, I want to be the first person to have hard conversations with my kids, because I know that kind of sets their framework or their foundation for understanding that topic. So I don't want them to have come across that in a book they're reading or on a show or anything like that. So I'm glad we got to talk about it. It just threw me off. I wish I would have had a little bit of warning. Just for reference, it ends up okay. Like, the kid wasn't actually attempting suicide. Everybody assumed he was because he climbed up on this water tower. I'm just going to give you some spoilers. Sorry if you care what the book's about, but I think it's more important to understand where this is going, is the fact that he climbed up to this water tower to like run a prank, basically. And he wasn't trying to commit suicide, but the whole town thought he was. And then this kid was really worried, and he went up to help him and all these things, right? But you learn that he wasn't. He was upset, yes, with what was happening to him and how he was kind of being bullied in response to the football player getting hurt. It was a side character in the whole big plot, but it still was a part of the plot, and it kind of caught me off guard. But I'm really happy we got to talk about it. And I did go on the Sonlight Moms Facebook group, and I like typed in Captain Nobody just to see what others were saying, and obviously people had brought up the fact that this brings up suicide, and everybody has the right to respond how they want. Some people were like, I threw it in the trash. Other people were like, no, I'm a like child psychologist and I work with some of these things, and this was a healthy way of bringing up a hard topic. And so to me, I fall in that second camp of like, this was a healthy way to bring up a hard topic, and we get to do it in my house, which is one of the beauties of homeschooling, you guys. That's why I just hold to it, and I just love it so much. So anyway, I did want to give that aside. In case you pick up this book, you need to know that. So know that. The other thing that we have been reading, because we have nighttime readings, especially with my big kids this past couple months, and we've been reading the Wing Feather Saga by Andrew Peterson. So On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness, we finished this. We're on to the second book. I love it. I love knowing that he is a Christian author. I love seeing kind of good versus evil, the reference to the Maker in this book. And it's just a sweet story about this family, the Ickaby family, and they're in this place called Scree, and it's been taken over by these like lizard-like fantastical creatures who are running the country, and they're kind of living under this rule. That's kind of what the first book is about, and some things happen and it goes badly in so many different ways, but it's so good. I would say the age of my kids is good. There have been some intenser moments. I probably wouldn't read it for anybody younger than 8. And you also just have to know your kids. If you have sensitive kids, I would wait even longer than that. But this is actually our plan for the rest of the spring and summer, is to read this whole series. So we are loving that. Now on to my kindergartners. Again, we're using HBL K and Science K, which I just made a video about this. Actually, I made a how much reading in a day or week of this program to kind of give you an idea, especially if you're thinking about this for kindergartners or first graders for next year. How much time would this take? I just made that video. I'll link it above. But as for how it's been going this past January, you know, it's been just fine. I feel like The history is good in the sense that it's covering all of history pretty much in a year. So you're hopping around. I mean, linearly in time, but it's not spending any time anywhere. And that's okay with me. I feel like it's just a little brush of history, and the same with science. There's just a little bit of information of science. So it's been good. It's been fine. I mean, honestly, I probably could take it or leave it. My kids, some days are super engaged, other days I'm not even sure if they're paying attention, to be honest. But the read alouds. The read alouds are my favorite, and the books are also my kids' favorite. So we've read Roxy and the Hooligans, which is a favorite in my family. We quote this book all the time because I've done this program with my big kids. And so I had read this to them previously. And then there was a new book. So this was one that hadn't been read 2 years ago, and it's a Kate DiCamillo book, and it's called Franklin, Endicott, and the Third Key. And there's also some of that like Mercy Watson pig involvement in this story, but it's mostly about this kid who is a little bit frightful of things. He's scared of a lot of things, and he learns throughout this book that he doesn't need to be so scared, and it's just really sweet. It's a sweet book. My kindergartners really enjoyed it. We're currently reading this one, The Silver Balloon, and they're enjoying it. Actually, what I decided to do for the end of the year, so this spring semester, is we only have 5 books left. So these were the 5 books, are the 5 books we have left. We put them all out, and I read the backs, and I decided that I was just going to let them choose what order we read them in. Now, granted, my kids, especially my kindergartners, are good at listening to stories. They have grown up around this. So like to them, a book that's like this big or Little House on the Prairie, they're gonna sit for it. It's not a big deal. Like these are scheduled near the end of the curriculum for the reason that they're kind of bigger and your kids might need practice. I know mine don't. And so I was just like, let's just see what they want to do. So I had them rank them. And they actually ended up ranking them from biggest to smallest for some reason, but they decided to do Silver Balloon first. And so that's what we're reading. And then these ones are what's left, and they put them in order, which I just thought was kind of fun. I like giving my kids some autonomy or some choices when it doesn't matter, because then they feel like they have some ownership. And the other book that's kind of a read aloud, I guess it's not, it's written into the history section of the instructor's guide, is this one, Out of Darkness, The Story of Louis Braille. This is a really good book. It's just about how Louis Braille became blind, the accident that happened when he was a kid. It told the story of how he had to deal with it. It told the story of going off to the blind school in Paris and all this, and then it told the story of how he developed the Braille system for reading for blind people, right? What I loved about this book, which was just really fun, is the ability for my twins, my 6-year-olds, to assess the fact that this was a real person. I mean, we've read like Roxy and the Hooligans, and we have to like, those aren't real people. This is a fiction story, right? But this is a real person. And it's just kind of hooked them in the way that now everything we read or talk about, even if it's a show, they're like, is this real, Mom? Is this a real story? And I'm like, well, no, this one's not real, but it came from this book. It came from understanding what happened here. And just, there was so much in here that had to do with character and character formation and just the person of Louis Braille and how he was very humble and not like really full of himself, even though he brought such an amazing thing to the world, right? I know his name, everybody knows his name. And so it was just a really sweet story. And yes, it was not as engaging as Roxy and the Hooligans. Yes, it took a little bit more for them to pay attention to, and sometimes I had to stop short when they weren't paying attention. They were still able to kind of engage it, answer some questions. That was a highlight for sure. I would say the other thing that was a highlight was our science experiment. So the one we just recently did was making clouds in a jar. You guys, it was so much fun. I don't even know if I can hold this up. I probably shouldn't. Okay, so you can see a little bit of it there. It was such a fun experiment, you guys. My kids loved this. They loved the idea that we could make clouds in a jar, since we're talking about weather right now for science. And so that was just a real highlight. But again, their family subjects or their Sonlight subjects are kind of lower on the totem pole than, say, their phonics and math. So I'll get to them in just a second, because I think I'll segue now into my individual kids. We'll start with my 4th grader because it's just easier to work my way down. Math, we're still doing Saxon. Saxon can be a lot. So we're doing Saxon 5-4. He's not naturally gifted at math, but I think Saxon has really helped give him the scaffolding and the spiral to help him understand math, even though it can be a challenge. And sometimes when I correct his work, he missed a lot, and that can be a little discouraging, but we just work through it and make sure he understands it. And eventually he does get it. And since it really is such a pain point for him, math, he actually started coming up early to start his math fact sheet and his warm-ups for Saxon. And you guys, early, I mean 6 a.m. My household is always up early. We have to keep them in their rooms till 7. Sometimes the twins wake up at 5:30, but my son's usually up around 6, and he just goes and he starts his math so that he can have less to do later. And I just love that about him. I love that personality aspect of him. I don't think any of my other kids are going to be like that, but he totally is, which is just, it's great. So that's math. And then for his language arts, mostly the biggest thing he has is logic of English, which covers his like vocabulary, grammar, and spelling. And that again is going well. I feel like we struggled a little this month because there was so many breaks, whether it be pink eye or he was gone for Legoland. And the problem with that is the way the lessons are set up in Logic of English is it's 5 parts, and some of the parts I even split in 2. And so if it's been a week since the last time we've done it, he's forgotten kind of the earlier part of that unit. And that can make it just a little less cohesive and a little more challenging. I mean, he's been fine. He has found that he is spelling better. I mean, I think Logic of English is good for spelling, but I have told him over and over it's because of reading. The more he reads, the better his spelling. And he's been reading like crazy these days. He loves books. And so he's doing good. We have tried to do a little bit more partnership writing from Brave Writer, which I will link above the video I just made about kind of our language arts adjustments for the spring semester. Is I was just moving him into more of that creative kind of writing to make him really feel confident in his writing before we move into what's coming next, which I still don't know. But you guys, I also want to take a moment to thank you all for your comments on writing programs in my brainstorming video. That was fantastic. You guys gave me so much to think about. But this semester we're going to do partnership writing, and we're doing okay with it. Oh my gosh, you guys, I just need more structure. I need a program that tells me to do this on day 1, day 2, day 3. I'm finding, because when I have to kind of put it on my schedule, I can sometimes be like, I'll just move it. I'll move it to another day because I feel like I'm the one putting it on there. I don't know. And so we're struggling to get it done, but there have been some good things. Like we did a little secret codes. We didn't do all the activities, but he still got to play with words and stuff, which was fun. We're doing a timeline project, which originally was scheduled to kind of be more of a tell your life story. I think we're going to use it more in the like, he just got a bunch of pictures from Legoland, so we're going to instead set up a timeline of like day 1, 2, 3, and 4 of Legoland with pictures and little description boxes. So I think it's the same feel to the assignment, just with something he's really excited about right now. And then the other day, yesterday, he actually came to me and asked if we could do a writing assignment that had to do with what he's interested in doing when he grows up. Like he wants to do research on these things and talk to me about it, find things, and then write a paper. I was like, okay. I mean, it's great because this semester we're not really following a tight schedule. So I'm like, of course we can do that. I don't really know how to do that. I'm not quite prepared for that, but I can be prepared because when he initiates, I say yes. As simple as that. So he's doing well. As for my daughter, she's doing well too. Like that language arts video mentioned, we did a big switch for her into the good and the beautiful. So go see that video if you're kind of curious why or where this came from. I explain a lot in there. But as for how she's doing, it's going really well. There's a few hiccups, usually in spelling. And what I'm learning to do with her is the way that the Good and the Beautiful sets up their spelling, at least in level 2, is they have this little spelling practice book. That's what it's called. But it's only every other day. And what I'm doing is I'm taking that off day that it's not scheduled, and I'm just having her do something with those words. Whether they are writing them on the window here, or just writing them in alphabetical order, or writing them in shapes and things like that. But just to continue kind of those words, to have them in front of her and have her just be practicing them in a very small sort of way. And so we're doing that, which has been good. She really likes the little videos that go with the Good and the Beautiful level 3. Those have been great. I mean, it just basically teaches the lesson, and the lady's sweet and funny. And so that's been going well. What I have been loving is it's been stretching her a little in these like geography sections of the Good and the Beautiful, because they have to read, and they're reading for content and then they're answering questions, which she's done some reading comprehension before. We use Abeka for that, but these are a little bit more involved. And so it is challenging her, and I'm helping her try and slow it down, because part of me feels like she's not quite ready for that, or some of the words they use are a little much and she doesn't quite get it, and so she just guesses, right? And so I think it's good. It's pushing the boundary of where she's comfortable, but it's not like breaking the boundary, if that makes sense. So that's been good. I'm still holding that loosely. Our tandem reading when we read together, like Timothy and the 10th Floor, has been great. That's probably been my favorite, as well as the writing, which I brought an example of why I really like the writing, which this is one of the things that did push me to the Good and the Beautiful. Is here's an upcoming lesson. I don't know, I just wanted one that was blank and didn't have her writing on it. But this is an example of a persuasive essay. And you can see it teaches it over here. There's probably a lesson and all the things. But this is the work she's going to work off of. It basically starts it for her. And it explains what's all here in blue and how you make these kind of intro sentences. And then it gives even more scaffolding here. And then more down here. Like, it gives kind of the framework for how to write a persuasive essay. And then it just has them fill in a little bit. And then there's a lot more confidence built in that. And I feel like this child needed that. She was kind of floundering with the, like, how to set up that paragraph, how to set things up, that this system was exactly what she needed. And so I'm happy that that's how the Good and the Beautiful teaches it. Now, as for readers, so I have not bought books from the Good and the Beautiful, other than I'll show you in just a second, because I wanted her to keep reading her Sonlight readers. And I love Sonlight readers, right? This kiddo, I feel like she is like a kid who just reads quickly through things and doesn't necessarily understand them and doesn't want to admit that. And so when I go to ask her, like, well, what was that chapter about? What did the girls do? You know, in this cute historical fiction book about kids from Russia in the early 1900s. It's a really cute book. It's very simple. And she doesn't know. She struggles to kind of tell me. She struggles to answer the questions when I kind of let her go and read it, which tells me I probably should be sitting and reading it with her, which I'm okay with that. Or, I mean, since I am doing a tandem reading with the Good and the Beautiful, or I could pick books that are a little bit easier for her to feel more confident, so that it's not always hard things, right? So this brings me to some other things I did end up picking up from the Good and the Beautiful, because they had a quick, like, 2-day sale when they republished these books. So these are the Badger Hills Farm books, and these continue the story of Timothy and Zoe, which are the kids in Timothy on the 10th Floor, which we are currently reading, and she loves these characters. And it's a 6-book series, and it's a mystery type series. She loves mysteries. She's my kid that loves mysteries. My son doesn't necessarily love mysteries, and so when these were on sale, and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to get them. I'm going to get them even if she doesn't read them right away. But I'm contemplating seeing if maybe these would be a better option for her kind of 20 minutes of independent reading, because I always like to have them read a bit, and it's usually Sonlight books, but it could be these books, and that's something I'm trying to kind of work out right now, just based on observing her and seeing how it's going and trying to decide if I always want to push, and sometimes I think it might be better not to. But I did forget to mention what my son was reading. So these are the level 4 readers from Sonlight, and he's currently reading Henry and Ribsy. He did read this. This was a little harder to understand just because it's an older language and it's the Whipping Boy, but I thought it was a really good classic. I liked for him to know Encyclopedia Brown, he had no problems with, and then he likes the more stories from Grandma's Attic as well. So those were the books he's currently reading. I just forgot to mention that. I think that's all for my daughter. Her math is just fine. Her math is just fine. And then for my kindergartners, you guys, they're doing so good. They have kind of, both of them, just started feeling more comfortable with phonics and reading. It's so much fun. It's so fun. These are the first kiddos of mine that I have taken entirely through Abeka phonics. My older two, we started with Logic of English Foundations, a little bit of All About Reading for my son, and then just All About Reading with my daughter. None of that worked. Abeka phonics is really what's gotten all of my kids reading. But what is so fun is with my twins, they are now on these cute little books that, like, I learned to read books, and they're very short and sweet, but we're to the point where they can start reading some of these really small books. Like, there's not too much going on here, but they're so proud of themselves, you guys, because we've just worked a little bit at a time, on blending, on blend ladders, on just phonics in general. And sometimes, yes, the worksheets are a little much for my kids. Like, for instance, I brought this out. Here's an example of a worksheet from Abeka Phonics, K5. Sometimes this is what? 12 different problems. I'll just like take out the bottom row or the bottom 2 rows and have them keep practicing, but sometimes they get a little fatigued if they have to do all of this. And that's always how I have treated Abeka Phonics worksheets. There's just a bit much, in my opinion, and they don't quite need it as long as they're progressing and as long as they're reading, it's going well. Because like right now, the program is just now telling me to have them read a little bit in the evenings to someone other than me. Like, and so we're having my husband, like they're so excited to take these little books to my husband and sit down and read with them. It's just like, it's precious. And so I'd say kindergarten's going really well, especially with like Abeka Phonics and arithmetic, handwriting. I feel like this is the thing. I never know how quite to gauge. Like, even though these are my 3rd and 4th kids, you'd think I'd know. But I feel like at first with my oldest, I wasn't sure what was a good expectation. Should I always correct? Should I always make sure they're doing it perfectly? And I always felt like, no, I shouldn't hammer them on handwriting too much. And it's fine because his handwriting's just fine now as a 10-year-old. But now it comes to my twins, and I'm also kind of like, I don't know what I should be correcting because they're doing the classic things, right? Where things are backwards, things like they're starting from the bottom and going up to make the eyes, things like that. And I'm trying to correct as I go, but I'm just not super consistent. And I'm like, oh, I hope I don't regret this. But then at the same time, I don't feel like I was really consistent with my older kids, and they're fine. So I'm trying to kind of toe that line. And then I feel like handwriting, it should not be that big of a deal. And it isn't. But I also don't want it to become a big deal because I was too lazy in their kindergarten year. So anyway, that's my kindergartners. But you guys, all in all, January has been good. It's been a good year. I mentioned that in one of my last videos. It's like, it's been a good year. And I'm really thankful for that. There's been other things going on that is just kind of hard and heavy. And to have school be going well has been a real blessing. And so that's how January went. Prayers for February. And I'm just really thankful for the curriculum we have because I don't have to do it myself. I don't have to plan it out. It's planned for me. So anyway, you guys, I hope you're doing well. Let me know how January's been for you, how this start back up into the spring semester has gone. It can be hard. I know that. So I hope you all are doing well. And as always, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to. And I will see you guys in the next homeschool video. All right, take care.